she'll shake your windows and rattle your walls. But the times they are changing. Yes, they're changing.
Where do you get your sense of identity? Where do you get your sense of self? Do you feel that you are truly yourself? Are you in the process of becoming the person that you are? Or do you feel like, especially if you've been raised in evangelicalism like me, or fundamentalism, or have had an experience of church, that was your identity, and you're struggling to find out who you really are? Maybe that's the journey that you're on. If that's the case, then I think you're going to love this episode today, part 2 of MindShift podcast, with me, your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, as I bring you the second half of the chat that I had last week with Stacie Rae, the resting traveler from Canada. We had an absolutely fantastic conversation. Stacie was describing her own journey of deconstruction and how she was able to somehow come to an understanding, or I should say a new understanding, of God and of the Bible. And in fact, that's what we're going to get into in this episode today. We are talking about her new book that's come out just a few weeks ago. The title of the book is Into the Forest, A Passionate Journey of Unveiling the True Self Within. In today's episode, Stacie and I are going to get into more detail about how she came to write the book. If you remember the way I left you hanging at the last week's episode, Stacie was talking about her own journey of deconstruction, and she hadn't gotten to the reconstruction part. She was at the lowest ebb of all. It was ironic in a way that her walking away from the church and deconstructing her views, her very identity, who was she, that actually led her lower and lower into a path of depression, anxiety, to the point where she said at the end of last week's talk that she was thinking about committing suicide, about ending it all. And you know something, this is no laughing matter, because as it turns out, there are a lot of people within evangelicalism, within fundamentalism, who not only have thoughts of suicide. We talked with Sarah Smith a few weeks ago, and she said, too, she had learned to loathe herself because she knew deep down inside that her attraction to women was something that the church told her was evil, immoral, wrong, against the Bible and against God's wishes, and she was unable to reconcile this sense of cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, she's feeling these feelings, and they're authentic and real, but on the other hand, she can't reconcile that with what she's being told by the church. And so she too contemplated suicide, as Stacie did. And in fact, this is an all too common problem. I read you last week a quote from Candace Gorham's chapter. Now, Candace is a therapist who counsels people who come out of fundamentalism and evangelicalism, and she talks about people that have feelings of depression, anxiety, PTSD, and yes, even suicidal thoughts or even attempting suicide. In fact, I came across a tweet just the other day dated May the 5th. I won't tell you who it's from, but it was unbelievable. It was a youth pastor, and he says in his tweet, he says, quote, "This morning, I found myself up much earlier than usual, so I decided to check my email and just generally screw around on my laptop. During this time, I received an email from one of the queer teens I peer counsel as a youth pastor at my church. It was a suicide note. I got there as quick as I could, but I was too late. Max was already dead. He had hanged himself sometime in the 10 minutes it took me to get there. CPR was attempted, but he had been anoxic for too long." And unfortunately, this tweet goes on to talk about this kid, Max. He could not reconcile this issue, and Max left a suicide note. And I'm certainly mindful of the fact that this is a very extremely sensitive issue. But this youth pastor posted the entire suicide note in full, and he said, "I want people to read this. And so I'm doing this. I want to read this suicide note to you, basically in Max's honor, to remember Max and to highlight how important these issues can be." So to honor Max and to highlight the importance of the life that he lived, no matter how short it might have been, I want to share Max's final words with you. And so this is what Max's last statement was. He said, quote, "Dear world, You are ugly and dirty, and you make me feel ugly and dirty. I have heard all my life that I am a sinner, even though I love God, and I like to think God loves me too. I'm sorry, Jack, that I didn't kiss you that day. I'm sorry, Pastor Pete, but please don't be sad. Mostly, I'm sorry, Grandma, because I know you tried really hard to love me when no one else would. I'm sorry I let you all down. I'm sorry, but I'm just tired of all the hate. I'm tired and want to sleep forever, but maybe I will wake up in heaven and there will be no hate there and only love. No one will call me bad names or hit me or remind me of my accidental place here. Every day I watch the news and see the hate against people like me, and I realize I have no future. This country I don't recognize anymore hates me and makes laws to punish me just because I'm gay. They hate me because I love too much and love too wrong. I learned that my kind of love is bad. I heard it enough to believe it a long time ago. Every day someone comes along and tells me that I am worthless and my love, how I love, who I love, is an affront to God, as if anyone truly knows God's mind. And Max goes on to say, I love beautiful things and I cry when they are gone. There is no more beauty left in the world. It has been replaced with this alien thing called hate. Bad people killed all the beautiful things. This is not a world I want to live in. This is my choice, said Max, and the only choice I was ever given, and it is mine alone. I love you, but I won't miss any of this, and I don't think in the end I will be missed much at all. In a world that looks at me like I'm something dirty they found on the bottom of their shoe. And Max concludes his suicide note, and he says, I'm sorry I was weak and that I loved too much, Max. And that's a sad statement, isn't it? That we heard Stacie say she contemplated suicide. We heard Sarah Smith say she contemplated suicide. Poor Max did more than just contemplate suicide. He actually ended his life on the 5th of May, just a few days before I'm doing this recording. So this is absolutely a sad and terrible thing. This is one of the legacies of evangelicalism. When there's this construct set up that God is disappointed with you and me for not living up to his standards. And unfortunately for someone like Max, he was unable to reconcile what he was being told and how he was being treated. So he ended his life. And so what I want to know today when we get into the chat with Stacie is, how did she not only dig herself out of that pit, but you know what? She's somehow been able to retain a view of God and a view of the Bible. Now, yes, it's massively deconstructed and massively reconstructed, and we want to find out how she did that. And maybe this describes you as well. Maybe you're a person who's deconstructing your own Christian faith. Maybe you're asking a lot of questions, and this is a really important chat to have with a person like Stacie, and previously too with Sarah, where we can find out how you do it. How did they do it? I'm not saying you should become an angry atheist. Maybe you already are. I don't know. Maybe you're an angry theist, like we're going to talk about in a few weeks with Sam Morse from the Out of Eden podcast. But you know what? I don't know where you are on that spectrum, but it's important to hear these different voices and to hear these different points of view. People like Stacie, people like Sarah Smith. And next week, we're going to hear from Josh de Keyser from the Netherlands, how he is able to somehow reconcile what it means to be some sort of a Christian in this day and age, in this understanding of God, in this understanding of the Bible. I don't know how they do it. I honestly don't. So that's why I'm here to learn just as much as hopefully you are by listening to these various points of view. So I really hope that you find this chat today with Stacie helpful, the second half of the conversation that I had with her. And I think Stacie's passion really comes across, this idea of finding rest on your spiritual journey, wherever you are, whatever you're going through. I don't know, but we all need to find a place of rest and contemplation and healing, whatever that looks like. Well, that's my hope anyway. I really trust that this chat I have with Stacie is helpful for you and informative and encouraging to you wherever you are on that spiritual journey. Now, it's just occurred to me too, before we get into the chat with Stacie, that I better bring you up to speed on where we left it last week. Stacie was describing her own journey of deconstruction of her Christian faith and where that left her. And she had a lot of people calling her a heretic. They said they were praying for her salvation, and she was really questioning her own identity. Who am I? And this is where we pick up the thread this week. And if you find that this chat is truly helpful, I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to give you my contact information after we finish part 2, which is what we're going to do right now with Stacie Rae, the resting traveler, talking about how to find rest on your spiritual journey.
But for me, it helped me and it harmed me because I didn't know who I was. I'm questioning who I am. And that led to this great loneliness. And like I said, no one can understand me. I was so alone and no one can hear me. And to be told that you've got family praying for your salvation, to be honest, it kind of makes you go, am I right? Like, maybe I'm wrong. What if I'm wrong? Oh my goodness, I'm wrong. And then fear comes in and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to go to hell. It's messy. For me, that messy, horrible place, I found myself somewhere I had never been before. That deep loneliness brought me to a place of thinking about taking my own life. And I had never, ever been there. I'm not the person who's ever been depressed. It's just not been my life. This was a new thing. I've always had this positive attitude and a way to just kind of pick myself up. And I just kind of allowed myself to start feeling all this stuff. And then one day I kind of just had enough. I was laying in bed. It was really, really like late in the night, kind of that wee hours of the morning. I can't sleep. I'm dealing with like severe anxiety. Every little bump in the night, I'm awake. And I just remember crying out to God and just begging him to take me. Like, I just wanted death. I was done living. Like, what is the point of living when none of your family, none of your friends, not even your spouse can understand what you're saying and they're questioning you? And it's like, it's kind of like they want to believe, but they're so scared to believe. It's almost being that forerunner, like you're the first person and they're just watching you. And so I'm just begging God to take me. It's probably a moment I will never forget. It's clear as day.
Yeah, that's a very, very dark place for sure.
Yeah. And it's, you know, Doctor Strange. So like, there's this power that he has, and my kids will probably laugh at me because I don't know all the names, but he has this power where he can like move his hands around and then he creates this opening, like a portal to another place in the world.
Yes.
And so I have this experience where it's like that's happening and suddenly in front of me, there's like this window that's opened and I can see my dad in his house. So he lives in another province. Okay. Like to drive there, it's like 12 hours away. So I see my dad at this very moment where I'm like, okay, I can't do this. I'm going to take my life. And I see my dad sitting on the floor in the room that he prays in every single night. And I hear him. And he is begging for my life. My dad is like calling out for me and saying to God, you know, please, do not let this happen. Her life is worth more. Show her that she's not alone. You know, he's weeping with my name on his lips. And that was the moment, that pinnacle moment where I realized I was not alone. Because I think that loneliness is probably the most dangerous territory we can be in. It's the lie that says that you're not worth living, you're not worth investing in, you're alone, nobody cares. And from that moment on, everything changed. That's when I started to see God, my Papa, in everything in my life.
I think a lot of people who end up committing suicide, it's because they are convincing themselves, like you say, for a lot of reasons that nobody cares, nobody wants to know about what they're going through. The best possible solution is just to end it. My cousin committed suicide, and, you know, it was a terrible, traumatic time. He reached out for help, and unfortunately the help wasn't there. And like so many people, there was the tragic call for help that wasn't heeded, and he ended up ending his life. And, you know, what a tragic waste it was. But, you know, this is what's interesting. You know, when you tell your story about that moment, it's an unbelievable account of, you know, laying in bed and seeing this vision. that's when everything changed for you. Because a lot of people going through the experiences that you did, you know, combining with the church and this mental health and all this other stuff that was going on, they have become atheists. They've packed the whole thing in and walked away from all of it, or even become the angry atheist, trying to talk people out of becoming Christians or talk Christians out of being Christians. How come you didn't end up going down that road of being the angry atheist?
That is a very good question. And I remember you asked me that the other day, and I honestly had never even thought about that before. Like, I guess I had just this oblivion that everybody just finds this beautiful place with Papa, you know. It had never occurred to me that people were leaving the faith and the ideology altogether. And it's funny because since you said that the other day, I keep running into all these articles of different people who they are like angry. They're so angry and they've lost all hope. I even just today reading an article about, I think his name is Bart Campolo, Tony Campolo's son. And, you know, he doesn't even believe in any type of, after this life. Like, he believes this is a temporal life and there's no God and there's nothing after this. And it's like all the hope has been stolen from his belief system. And I couldn't really say, because I don't believe there's ever a formula. I can't really say, you know, well, this is why. But if I had to speculate, I would say it was because I was able to sift out the man from the religion to the love in the spirit. You know, like I left religion and I was able to say, this is the line right now for me. This stuff, I can't see God in this stuff, but I can see him here. And I know one of the big problems is just like, for me, religion just came with so many rules that didn't make sense. But when I look at who God is as like a loving being, he doesn't have any rules. And maybe that's why religion doesn't like that, because I don't see God having any defining line. Isn't that the beauty of humanity though? Like, if we look at our fellow brothers and sisters, not one of us are the same. We all have these beautiful individual personalities, and we have this grandness about us. And when I look at that, I think like that's a reflection of that like endless wonder of who God is. And so I think that maybe I was just able to say, I always just get this picture of like an actual like sieve, you know, just sorting it out. Like, nope, that's not God. That's not God. Okay. So like examples would be, okay, Old Testament, you have all these stories of like genocide and slavery and racism and terrible, terrible things. Okay. If I put that and I say, is this God? Well, some people would say, well, because the Bible says it, then it's God. Whereas I can't live that way. Because first of all, the Bible to me, I don't believe that it's inerrant. I think it's inspired, but I don't believe it's inerrant. And so topics like that, I'm able to put in the sieve. And if they can't come through those holes, then it can't be God. Why? Because God in his true nature, the core of who he is what? Love. If you are a God of love, would you kill babies? Of course not. We have religions all over this world that are against the killing of children, against child trafficking. Obviously, as humans, we have an understanding that that is wrong, right? Like,
yeah,
probably
definitely
not the best thing, right? You got mass murders in different, well, most recently, we had someone that drives into the city of Toronto and just drives into a bunch of people. We are mourning over that. Why? Because we have this thing inside of us that says that is not right. Okay, so if we have that, how can we look at the Bible and say, but God said he commanded that these things happen, so that must be God. See, that doesn't line up, because what that does is say that I am better than God. I have a better moral compass than God himself. So that doesn't make sense to me. So I think really and truly the only reason I was able to come away not angry is to say, why don't we just see what we can dissect, take apart, and then rebuild? because there's so much left to rebuild. I don't know. I think it boils down to that simple, remove the religion, find spirituality. What does your path with God look like aside from what man says? And that's been my journey.
I'm glad you brought up that issue of the Bible, because I was going to bring that up myself. You beat me to it, But I was going to say, one of the things I've been struck by lately, people that have managed to keep some view of God, that maybe walked away from the church. I've actually added another category on my list. I started out with about 4 or 5, and now I'm up to, I think, 13. And you and some other people have kind of forced me to add another category. And it's these people who basically haven't just jettisoned God and everything and become atheists or angry atheists. But one of the key things that comes up in talking to people is that they've had to come up with a new lens through which to read the Bible. Because, like you said, if you're committed to a position that says the Bible is fully without error and it's fully inspired and every word is God's word, then you have to take everything at face value. Like you said, the text says that God commanded genocide. That's what it says. And it says he commanded a lot of really harsh laws, especially toward women. This is something that Karen Garst talks about a lot. Pretty horrific things, you have to marry your rapist and other things. And God's the one who commanded that, according to the text. So you're going to have to come up with a way to explain that away, or just go, well, that's God, and I've got to somehow accommodate my views with this pretty cruel, capricious God of the Old Testament. So it sounds like you've been able to do that by sort of abandoning the inerrancy position and all the sort of house of cards that comes along with it. Because if you take one card away, the whole thing comes crashing down and you lose your whole faith. I think that's why it's so emotionally threatening for people who perhaps are afraid of your deconstruction, because for them, if they saw you walking away and they thought, my God, if I walk away, there's nothing left. It's very threatening.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly, that's such a good point, because you have to be willing, if you're going to look at example, like we're saying with the Bible, if you're going to look at that and say, okay, I'm willing to sort through this and believe that it is not inerrant, then that requires that you also say, I don't know everything. To be open and acknowledge that we really don't know the depth of those stories, who wrote them, what the intention was, the background, the history. To me, there has to be a level of humility to say, you know what? We don't know. God could be bigger than we think, first of all, when you look at all these dividing lines that religion puts up, So maybe God's love really is bigger than you guys say. And then in terms of the Bible, to say it is possible that we just don't know. And I don't think that enough people in fundamentalism and evangelical circles, I don't think that they have that. It's like they have to have an answer. I'm okay with not having an answer. And I'm not saying that flippantly, that was just such an easy thing to come to, because it wasn't. But I honestly don't think there's another way, because if you demand that everything has an answer, you will just run in circles, because there's all these contradictions in the Bible. And so much of it, I don't think we were ever meant to read it the way that we are.
That's true. In fact, one of the things I've studied a lot on preaching. That was what I did my dissertation on, actually, when I came over here. And one of the things I learned was that, as you say, it's just the history of the church, really. When you look at sermons, for example, the preacher is expected not only to interpret the text, but also apply it for the listeners. So it's the complete package. And for me, a lot of my preaching when I was a pastor and the few times I got invited to preach, I always left it open-ended. I wouldn't apply the text. I would ask a lot of questions and have the people walk away going, yeah, I've got a lot more questions. But one of the feedback that I used to get quite often is people would come up to me after the service and say, well, what's the answer? And I'd say, what do you mean, what's the answer? Well, what does it mean? What does it mean? And I'd say that what it means is I want you to think, and I want you to walk away and wrestle with some of the possibilities that I've just raised. And people would go complain to the head pastor that, they didn't like that because it was unsettling, as you say. So the whole culture, the whole worldview is that's what preachers do. That's what church itself is for on a Sunday. You go to be taught the Bible by an expert who's gone to Bible college and seminary and can read Greek and Hebrew and can unpack the text and apply it and do everything for you. The images, people sitting around in diapers, basically, they're spiritually immature because they don't have to do any work. They're just spiritual babies, basically. That's what Frank Viola says anyway.
Yep, and you can't think for yourself. I know that's where I was, because that was one of the scariest things, is that I felt like I had just erased the chalkboard of my life and I'm starting again. And really and truly, that should not be scary. Like the way that I'm raising my children is to be critical thinkers. I know that I'm doing a good job when my 5-year-old comes home from a kindergarten class. So we're homeschoolers, but once a week we let them go to a class. And when my 5-year-old comes home and he says, "Mom, today our teacher did a little Bible study and she said that these people weren't God's children and they had to be killed." I'm like, okay, this is a kindergarten class.
What are we doing here?
And I said, well, what did you do, honey? Well, I told her that that's not God because that's not very loving. And I was like, okay, so he didn't just absorb it. He actually thought about it. And he was like, no, wait. That doesn't line up with this God that I know. And so I hope my kids never have to deconstruct the way that I have, because then there's so much that they won't have to deal with. For people that are, as you and I are, I think the biggest thing is to just get connected with other people so that as you erase that chalkboard, you know that there's other people who are doing it too, because that has been probably the most helpful thing ever. We're just so scared to ask questions. We're so scared to get it wrong. Oh, who cares if you get it wrong? Honestly, I'm at this place where I feel like, isn't God just big enough for that? I don't think that God controls the world. And I'm sure I'm going to get so much hate mail for some of the stuff I'm saying, but I just don't think God's in control. I think that he is so brilliant in everything he knows that he can see every possible outcome and every possible reality. But I believe that we have the choice to walk down any path. And some of them, they're not going to be really good for us. But in all things, God is with us, and he still walks down that path with us. So as we erase the chalkboard, as scary and terrifying that is, who cares if we get it wrong? You know what? It's just part of the journey. Keep walking. Just keep walking.
Yeah, but finds a rest, as you say, somewhere along the way. In fact, that brings me around to the book. This may be the last thing we can talk about on this episode anyway. Talk about the book. So what is who's the audience of the book, and who's it for? What's the book about? Because you said earlier in this conversation, you said it was kind of an accident. You didn't set out to write a book, but here you are. You've got a book now. What's it about, and who's it for?
Well, it was an accident in the sense that I didn't engage like, okay, today I'm going to start writing a book. I was going through all of that trauma, and every night I decided to just sit down at the desk and write out my thoughts. And what ended up happening was that after a couple months, I just felt like Papa said, okay, so here's your book. And I realized I had almost completed this book. And when I started to read through it, I was organizing it the way that I felt, like just that intuition. I organized it and I saw that there was a core theme, which was identity. And in that, I believe that the aim of this book is to help others unveil their true self, to help people see on their own journey the greatness of who Papa is and the greatness of who they are. My audience is very broad. It was something that as we were marketing the book and trying to kind of sort out what category does this book fit in? It's been difficult because there's so many layers to it. And I'm having readers that are saying, I found this, and these are things that are blowing my mind because I didn't see that in it. So I guess the core being identity, there's a couple different parts to the book. This is a book that there's so many people who will connect with it. So part 1 are chapters that are called Embracing the Pain. Why? Because I think that's something you have to start with. So because we're all on different parts of this journey, one of the parts is where you're at the beginning and everything is tumultuous and there's just chaos and there's a torrent of storms all around, Part 1 is embracing that pain. If you can learn, I was saying to you before, sometimes it's just about grabbing onto that electric fence and just taking that current until the circuit breaks. That's something I think we have to do to find rest. You have to acknowledge where you are. You have to acknowledge that pain and hold on to it. So there's people who will connect there. The second part of the book is all about uncovering the true nature of who Papa is. So those people will be most drawn to chapter 2, or part 2, pardon me. It's called Who is This Thing Called Love? And it's unveiling the identity of God himself. To see him as a compassionate Papa and a Mama. Then there's part 3. That's the unveiling of who we are. Who I am in this world of God. And so people who are they've already uncovered the truth of God, but I think there's that evolving into the truth of who you are. They're going to be most connected to part 3, because I think that if you can first understand who you are in God, you will see who you are so much easier. And then lastly, part 4 of the book is the multiple chapters that people of all parts in life will connect with. And it's about dreaming, the connection of God and you together, seeing your future, walking out your life in the past to your present and to your future, that dreaming and destiny, and taking the thing that is birthed within us, having it come alive. Honestly, this is tip of the iceberg, because in here there's these places where I talk about how religion just totally stole from me. I really feel so robbed, how the concept of hell doesn't make sense to me because it doesn't line up with the truth of who God is and his loving, compassionate nature. So the resting traveler is really about starting out in a place of suffering, entering into that mystical forest, meeting messengers of all different nature, like animals. And these are all coming from personal experiences that I had, like birds that were talking to me, and ants, things that were so common, and God was shouting. He's like, here I am. That's what you're going to find in this book. It's very unique, Clint. You won't be disappointed.
I was going to say, yeah, the cool thing about the book is the fact that it was sort of an accident. It wasn't the fact that this is your own journal. These are your own experiences, never having set out to write, quote unquote, a book. You just wrote a book. You didn't know you were writing a book, but you were living the book. So I think that's a really cool thing, because you didn't say, I'm going to write a self-help book that helps people figure out who the hell God is and figure out their problem. You just were living things out, and you yourself, this is your life story. Okay, it's not going to be the same for everybody, obviously, but I think a lot of people are going to identify, and it sounds like some of the readers that you're getting feedback from already are having amazing experiences from just reading the book, aren't they?
I had one lady just a few days ago. She had sent me a message and said, I got to page 2 of the introduction and I was weeping. And I just thought, Lord, you are so good, because I walked through a season of such darkness, and look at what you did with it. Other people are having light brought into their darkness because of what happened with me. There is no greater story I could ever tell. It is such an, honor isn't even the right word. That's just, it's not even a big enough word to describe how I feel that I could partake in someone else's journey in this way. It's blowing my mind.
And the story is not fully written yet. Well, that's one of the cool things too, is that meeting you and we had a great conversation about, about 3 weeks ago, I think, when I was over in Seattle, and we were actually talking about the chapter that you're writing for our post evangelical writers group book. And then we had such a great conversation that I said, we have to do a podcast episode on this. This is really, really good. People need to hear your story. So I don't even know where this whole thing is going, but I'm just kind of like you. I'm along for the ride. So I am super appreciative that you've spent almost an hour of your time just talking to us on this show. I mean, it's been a great conversation. I've loved it. I definitely want to come back and revisit this again. I said that to Sarah. I said, we need to come back in like 6 months and have another conversation and see what's changed from today versus, 6 months from now. So if you want to come back on the show, let's totally do it. We'll come back in 6 months.
Absolutely. And until then, I hope that more people that hear this call today will just brave the darkness. Don't be scared to see the beauty of who God is. And you know what else? I also hope to pick up my book. You can get it at my website, www.therestingtraveler.com.
And then how can people get a hold of you? Are you on Twitter, Instagram? What's the best way to connect with you on social media?
Well, I love Facebook and I love Instagram. So those are where you find me the most. I do have Twitter and YouTube, but I'm not on there a whole lot. I do have them. I just don't use them. So yeah, come and find me, and really just, I feel like the more people can connect and share their own journeys, like that's how we move forward, right? Like I would never have met you, Clint, had it not been for Facebook, right? So,
that's true.
Yes.
Good old Facebook.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I really hope that you had a great time listening in to my chats with Stacie Rae this week and last, The Resting Traveler. I hope that it's helped you find some rest along your spiritual journey, wherever you may find yourself. It's funny. I was just reflecting on this a minute ago about, I wasn't trying to find these people like Sarah and Stacie and Josh next week, and to some extent, even Sam Morris from Out of Eden podcast, which is going to be coming up after Josh. These people have all, in some way, shape, or form, managed to retain their views of God, even though it's meant that they've had to really reconsider their views of the Bible, read the text differently, and see God in a completely different way. And I think we have to step back for a minute and say, now, wait a minute, this is all about critical thinking. This is what this podcast is about. This is all about learning to understand what deconstruction looks like for different people, because the fact of the matter is, it looks totally different for every different person who is deconstructing, that is. You may find yourself anywhere along that spectrum that I've identified in my article, What Happens After People Leave the Church. The spectrum covers people that run the gamut, really. Deconstruction, as I said, looks different for every person. You could be someone, for example, on the top end of the scale who just wants to redo church and really believes that it's gotten it wrong according to the Bible, and you really have this passion for breathing life into the church and all the rest of it. You still consider yourself a Christian, all the way down to being an angry atheist or an angry theist, and you never want to have anything to do with the church again. But somewhere along that spectrum are people like Sarah and Stacie and Josh and Sam of the Out of Eden podcast. They're not exactly the same, but they've, as I say, they've been able to retain a view of God. And I think we have to be really careful and mindful of the fact that we have to honor that and not belittle someone who still believes in God, although it may be a very radically deconstructed and then reconstructed view of God. You really have to, if that's the path you're going to go down. And I think, as I say, we have to honor that, because deconstruction looks different for everybody. So I don't know where you're at on the spiritual journey, but I would love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Twitter. Follow me at MindShift 2018. And as I say, coming up next week, we're going to have a couple of episodes with Josh de Keyser from the Netherlands, followed by another couple of episodes with Sam Morse, the host of the Out of Eden podcast. And like Stacie Rae, he comes from Canada. So this is really cool. We're branching out a little bit. We've got some people from Canada. We've got a guy from the Netherlands. So we want to be more international. I'm going to be bringing you a few episodes coming up, hopefully very soon, with my friend Gary Hayes from Liverpool, although he's actually originally from London. We're going to be talking about the differences between the British and American church experiences, as well as some other topics. In fact, if you have suggestions for us to tackle, that would be great. I'd love to hear from you. So if you want to get a hold of me, my contact information is, as always, in the show notes, along with information as to how you can be a sponsor of this show for as little as $1 a month. So I will see you next Friday with part 1 of my talk with Josh de Keyser from the Netherlands, right here on MindShift Podcast.